some good questions asked out there while we were having a chat, by the way. I'm just debating with myself as to whether I should pursue them further or not. Too much reflection of the light there. It's like...
Yeah, so the questions we had outside were, what's most economical, to deal with how I've been harmed by others first, or to deal with how I've harmed others? Or if you want to put it another way, is it more economical to deal with my trauma first, or deal with my sin towards others? Yep. And then the other question was, what is the nature of humility, really?
Yeah. So let's look at this one, I think, first. Whether dealing with harm from others is best to deal first, or how I harm others. Which one is the best one to deal with first? Okay. Who thinks harm from others? Deal with that first.
Well, everybody heard our discussion outside, didn't they? So
yeah, who would prefer to deal with that first? Almost everybody, we find. And then how I harm others, what we normally find is nobody wants to do with that at all. Yeah. But because I've written next to it where the sin is, can you see if sin is the main cause of your own trauma and suffering in your own future, can you see that how I harm others is where I sin? So just because you have harm from others, it doesn't mean you need to harm others. The choice to harm others is taken because you want to harm others, not because you have been harmed. Right? So how I harm others is definitely the best thing to deal with first. It's also the most difficult thing to do with first. Because most people feel like, I would like to deal with how others have hurt me. And in fact, we become so selfish in our day-to-day life generally that all we ever look at is how somebody else hurts me. We never look at how we are hurting other people. So the answer to that question is quite clear. Deal with your sin first. That's what's going to make you a happier person. Deal with your sin first. You see, when you deal with your sin, attached to your sin is guilt. The law, God's law, demands that you feel guilty when you sin. So all of your internal guilt and all of your internal shame and feelings like that, all of your guilt feelings come from the fact that there has been sin that you're not recognizing as sin. Right? And that's your own pain and suffering is frequently caused because of your own sin. So now trauma, usually it's happened during childhood. Sometimes it happens as an adult. In the Western world, not very often, but in some cases it does. You know, like if a man goes off to war, for example, he might be sinning by harming others, but he also might have people harming him, so he will have some trauma as a result of that. Does that make sense to you? So you can say as an adult, a man who goes to war, he's got a choice. He's making a choice, isn't he, to harm others by going to war. He's also making a choice that he might also himself experience harm from others. Right? And so it's likely he would experience both some trauma, some hurt himself, as well as experience his own sin, the guilt of his own sin. But what he's going to find in the future is this is going to worry him more. It's going to bother him more how he harmed others. And eventually that's what happens. We've talked to many, like millions of people who have been involved in wars over the years, and they always eventually get to the point where their own sin is what they worry about more. They recognise that others harmed them, but that's in comparison to their own sin, it feels like minor. Because actually, when others harm you, it is visited upon them, their soul, not yours in terms of the guilt. It's visited on their soul, not you. When you harm others, it's visited on your soul. The guilt is visited on you. So it's always better to deal with how you harm others. Unfortunately, the general idea that most people have is almost the opposite to that. They sort of go, when it comes to love, the very last thing most people look at is generally how they loved others. When it comes to love, most people feel firstly how others are not loving them. Right? And that's a major problem that all of humanity really faces. Alex, you want to ask something about that?
Yeah.
Yep. We just pass the mic straight back. Don't have to get up, really just pass it back.
So, is it a good way to approach it then this way? To see if I really want to, if I know the harm I do, the sin I have, to really feel if I'm ready to repent, and see if I don't want to do that, and then work with it until I want to do it.
Well, I know that's what you're trying to do, but it's not very effective, is it? No. So as I have said prior to this many times, but also in this discussion earlier today, remember I said you need to first have an awakening before anything else can begin. So Mary did list to you some of the things that were involved in an awakening earlier today when we talked about repentance and then getting forgiven by God for something. And if you remember, the very first part of the awakening process is that you actually see and you actually believe you are sinning. So the biggest problem we see that most people have in terms of solving their sin is even when they're told they're sinning, they don't believe you. They don't believe the thing they're being told about is a sin in their feelings. So in your thoughts, you might, see, the problem with your thoughts are this: we can reason with you on a topic. So let's say, in your case, treatment of women. Let's reason with you on the topic. We can reason with you that you want power over women. We can reason with you that you really want to dominate their thoughts and their actions. You want to be the ruler of your castle, shall we call it, which is really just your home, right? And you want the woman to basically fundamentally agree with you on every subject. And you've also, from your childhood, we can reason with you that, can you see with your relationship with your mother, she liked giving you that feeling that, you were the king of you're the prince of the mansion sort of thing, right? So she liked to give you that feeling, and that's why you have the feeling. Now we can reason with you about all of those things. And internally, even though the reasoning may be logical, it may make a lot of sense, it may be quite, it's not presented in an unloving manner to you, in the sense we're not yelling at you and calling you names and berating you while we're telling you these things. So even though it's presented in a loving way and also very logical and very sound in its argumentation, that doesn't mean your feelings agree. You see? And for the awakening to sin to occur, it has to happen in your feelings. It can't happen in your mind.
I can feel that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
That's right. So it doesn't matter what we've said to you about your relationship with women at this stage. And so I'm picking a personal thing with Alex because we've had conversations in private, and also we've known him for longer than we've known many of you. So I'm just saying this, it's a good example to give. And that's the only reason why I'm saying, I'm not saying it to embarrass Alex either in this case, it's just to give you an example. We've had these conversations, and Alex has engaged with his mind these conversations, and he's trying to think about the logic of it and everything else, and he's trying to work it all out and reason it all out, and he's looking for extra logical argumentation coming from us, and because he knows we care about him and we care about his life and his future, he's quite open to listening to us at different times about these matters, and And so, you know, we have these conversations. But in the heart, the feeling is none of it's right.
Really like that? Do you feel it like this? You
Yeah.
said,
Yeah, solid. None of that's right. My feelings are telling me, no, the problem is the girl's not giving me what I should be getting. The problem is the girl doesn't love me. The problem is, you know, it's not my problem, it's the girl's problem. I'm expecting a whole heap of things from my partner, you know. I'm not overbearing, I'm not demanding, I'm cool, I'm a nice guy. You know, don't tell me that I'm these other things. This is what's going on in the heart, you see, in the feelings. The feelings are saying completely the opposite, even though you want to try to grasp with your mind that how to deal with it all. You know relationships you're having are getting destroyed through something going on, but you're not certain what that is. Half of you inside is saying it's the woman's fault that this is happening, not mine, and not due to my overbearing nature, let's call it, with women. And so the problem that everybody faces when it comes to sin is the awakening must happen as an emotional process, not as an intellectual one. And the more detuned I am from my emotions, the less chance there is for the awakening to occur in my heart. I'm going to try to attempt the awakening in my mind, and not only that, I'm also going to try to act better. You know, with my mind, I'm going to go, well, I can see, you know, they did have a point there, you know, that if Mary's got desires and I'm suppressing her desires by saying, oh, you sure you want to do that? You know, really want to do that? I think that's a silly idea.
Or you don't love me.
Or you don't love me if you do that, or whatever. I can see logically that I am suppressing her desires by doing that. But in my heart, I'm going, but she doesn't love me. She doesn't want to do what I want. See, my mum taught me that a woman should do what I want. So I'm going, that's my definition of love. And so I'm going, in my feelings, I'm going, I can see what you're saying about this overbearing thing, but actually, if she really loved me, she'd want to do what I want. So that's what's going on in the feelings. A completely different argumentation going on than what's happening in the mind. And if you're not careful in that state, you can separate your entire life from your soul by acting in harmony with your mind, or attempting to, while at the same time not dealing with the emotion that's actually existing in the feelings, in the soul.
It's the tricky thing, and you're not alone in this, Alex. Like, everybody nearly goes through this thing. But the tricky thing is when you're given the gift of truth about an area where you're sinning, and it might not come from us, it might come from someone you're in a relationship with who says, hey, I don't like you doing that thing, here's the problem. And they might have an example and point out all the things about it, and your intellect goes, oh yeah, maybe there is something there. But your feelings aren't yet with you. The feelings are quite confronted usually, even if you consider it intellectually. Often there's a like, whoa, hang on, no. And then
I'm better than that. Yeah. You know, like,
there's this
I'm nicer than that. How dare you think I'm that?
Yes.
I know those thoughts.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And if you're not careful, then it becomes an offence, doesn't it? Like, how dare you?
They don't know me.
They don't know me, and they're just attacking me,
yeah.
You know? And this, again, doesn't have to be with Jesus and I. It happens in people's relationships all the time. So it's like this crucial period between when you have an intellectual, awareness, and usually comes externally, whether it's from the conscience or from somebody else.
People telling you.
There's this crucial period of decisions you have. And if you're not careful, you can get into this thing that Jesus is saying, where even if you decide intellectually, okay, maybe they've got a point, I'll just change my behaviour, and then you try to be a better man, in your case, you know, in this way, you end up distancing yourself even further from the sin that's still inside of you, still driving you.
I understand that up here, I guess, but not here.
Yeah, not here yet, because it's usually a bit more difficult for a man to get it as well, because men have been taught over millennia now to be very detuned from their emotions, and in fact to look down on them, to criticise them, and to even look down on women having emotions. So
it's actually a fear in me that I don't get it at the end, you know. Because I know when I get it, I can feel it, and I didn't feel it until now.
Yeah, but this is what I mean about this critical period. There's decisions that you're making right now, and to be sensitive to the fact that even the feeling you have of like, I don't get it, like, no. This is actually a feeling that you're having of like, I want to reject this. So you need to be aware of that feeling. You need to say, this is a feeling of me. I obviously have quite an investment here because I really feel like...
Well, also emotionally you don't want to get it.
That's what I mean. You have to emotionally...
It's quite a simple thing to get when you want to get it emotionally.
Recognise that I've got quite a resistance here because I can't even get anywhere in these feelings. I can't even feel myself around women. Now I'm all shut off.
Yeah.
And so that's showing you already, okay, I've got a fear here. Anyway, what I'm trying to get to is it's a process of becoming more sensitive to your feelings, not detaching yourself from the sin through an intellectual process. Yeah. And that takes it's not a instantaneous thing that happens.
It can't be, because how you got injury and how you decided to sin has taken many, many years. And now, what's your age now? You're 51. And so you've basically had, if you think from puberty onwards, you've basically had 40 years, close to anyway, of engaging women in the same manner, expecting your version of love to come from women to yourself.
Even thinking it's good like this, because I learned that that's how you do it.
That's right. It's partially because you learnt it, but also partially because you haven't listened or watched all of your relationships up to now, because it's quite clear when relationship after relationship breaks that there must be something wrong, but you have always thought it's the other person that's wrong. So, you know, when you instead of going, oh, hang on a sec, maybe how I feel about women and how I act around women and what I expect from women, maybe all that is actually not very loving, you know. The reality is, if you're a loving man, you'll have, the way the world is nowadays, you'll have 10 women wanting to spend time with you, right? And I'm not suggesting that's good, because remember, we're talking about soulmate relationship, one woman. But the fact that a person can have 10 women leave them in the course of their life, right, is indicative of the fact that there's obvious problems that are not being faced, right? Yeah. So the awakening process, and we want to get back to the principle of the matter rather than talk about so much the details of the matter. The awakening process requires that you have an awakening in your feelings. In other words, that your feelings change about your sin. So instead of feeling that you're doing a loving thing, you start feeling, I'm doing an unloving thing, you know, and it hits you emotionally that you're doing an unloving thing, not, oh yeah, talk to me more about it, convince me, right? When a person needs to be talked to more about something or convinced, they are nowhere near an emotional awakening of their sin. And unfortunately, that is the state of most people we talk to, nowhere near that emotional awakening. But if we can at least describe what the awakening feels like, then you'll at least be able to recognize when you do reach it. All right? And it feels like, just like I almost described, like this terrible, almost guilt and dread coming over you that you, and it's emotional. It's like, oh, that is so bad what I've been doing, you know, that kind of feeling.
I had that a week ago when I was at home and Olga left, and the feeling came up, she has to come home, and I was really surprised about those thoughts within me.
Yeah, the whole reason why you're here, in fact, is to control Olga, but you don't understand that at this stage. You're worried about what she's doing when you're not around. You know, there is in most men there is a strong sense of ownership over women, and as a result, when the man's not there, they worry. What's she doing? Who's she with? is she falling in love with someone else? All sorts of things start coming up as to in most guys. And so they feel like they then need to gain control of that by, seeing what they're doing and going to where they are and seeing what they're doing and all those kind of things, rather than having any level of emotional realization by going, it's this feeling actually, this feeling that I got to be there, that is actually a part of the level of control I have over her, like the desire to control her. So it's not driven by a love of being with her. It's driven by a fear of what she is going to be doing when you're not there. And that's a completely different thing. Like, I love being with Mary. I enjoy her company. But I'm not, when Mary's off with friends, even if she's off doing things with male friends, sometimes Mary in the God's way is just only working with other men. Like, I don't have to be there. If I have a feeling of ownership, I will have to be there. I will have to be. What's she doing now? Who's she interacting with now?
Up and what's happening.
Bring her up, check her up. How are you going?
Home? Yep.
When you're coming home? Where's my dinner? It's an extension of that, right? But it's sort of like, that's what will happen if I have that sort of feeling of ownership. And for most men, they've been taught to have that feeling right from early ages, way before they even became intellectually aware. So there's an emotion coming out of their mothers generally, and also their fathers. It says, from the father, it says, you are man, so you are more important than the woman in the family. That's how the Islamic faith and the Christian faith got developed. That's why there's nearly 4 billion people on this planet who believe in those two faiths, because it all is about patriarchy, control. Do you know what I mean? And that's why 4 billion people on the planet, half of which are women, by the way, who believe in patriarchy as well, like who believe that this kind of domination is sexy and appealing and safe. And the problem is that these teachings that are obviously false when it comes when you look at it from an equality perspective, have pervaded society for thousands of years now. The Islamic faith began about 600 after my time, and the Christian faith began about 200 after my time, and both faiths have a heavy emphasis on male domination in the family. Right? So that's indicative of the fact that the whole of society would easily accept a religious teaching that teaches domination of the woman, right? And so most men on this earth have the problem, and most men don't realise how extreme the problem is. Yeah? And it is something that's going to have to be addressed if you really want to have a happy relationship with your partner.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So if we get back to this awakening, though, does everyone understand that it's an emotional feeling that you're awakening to? It's not like, I'm working it out, reasoning on the matter, and then I worked out, yes, it was a sin. It's not like that. It's like you might have gone through all that intellectually, but none of that is the awakening. The awakening is where you actually feel the power of it, and you feel the power of the damage of what you've done.
I was telling someone about this the other day, where we're very communicative with each other. G's a pretty developed guy. Often he will point out something to me, a sin I have, especially when we first met, long before I'm awakened to it. I've come to feel that as a gift, that he can see things in me, and often we'll talk about it or what have you. But then when I awaken to the sin, that's when I feel this feeling like I have to come to him and say, babe, there's this thing I've been doing, and I know you know, but really, if you were a regular guy, I would have to come clean right now, that this is a problem. But that's what awakening to the sin feels like. You feel like, no, I've done wrong. I am in the wrong here. And you don't feel like you want to hide that anymore. You don't feel like you want to justify it anymore.
Or fight about it.
You want to say, no, I get it. Wow, that's me. I'm doing the thing. So that's what awakening to sin feels like. It feels like there's no more blame or obscuring what's happening. I feel it as a felt sense. Yeah.
So once you have the feeling that is awakening you to the sin, it's very hard after that to continue it. Does that make sense? So a good sign as to whether you have had the awakening is whether you continue the same behaviour or not. Right? So we see people coming to us frequently and saying, oh, I had this realisation. It was an amazing realisation. I realised I was doing this with men or women or the environment or other things, children or whatever. And we go, yeah. And then they go, so, I think that's an amazing thing. Tell me that it's an amazing thing. And I go, no, it's not. Because you're still doing it. And the fact that you're still doing it means that nothing happened. It means that you went through all of that so-called experience, but at the end of the day, it wasn't an awakening of your soul. It was just your mind becoming aware, but nothing's actually changed. So that tells me, in your feelings, you actually want to continue doing it, even though in your mind you know. And so we see this happening a lot, where people hear something, it's in their mind now, they know in their mind, they'll even tell you. Julius came up to me the other day and says, I know that I'm like a mosquito sucking the blood out of people, right? And then also, the very next day, you suck blood out of people. You took all their energy from them, and you want to get them to, the women in particular, look after you and so forth. Tells me no awakening. You say you had one, and you only wanted to hear from me that you had one, and you didn't. There's no awakening, because an awakening means I don't want to do it anymore. I have an imperative to not do it anymore. I want to be sorry for it, and I want to repent for it, and I want to work through it. That's what an awakening means. It means that emotionally I'm driven to not do it anymore. So when you are still emotionally driven to do something, then it means the awakening has not occurred. Now, if the awakening doesn't occur, you can't sincerely ask God for forgiveness, because the awakening hasn't occurred and you're not sincere. To be sincere, God requires your feelings involved. That's the law. The law says your feelings must be involved in the process of feeling sorry. So what most of us have learnt in our childhood is this: all I need to do is say sorry. And that should be enough. People should forgive me. That's all I should need to do. And you often hear parents saying, say sorry, say sorry. Little Johnny, say sorry. Say sorry. And they bring him up. I remember one grabbing me by the ear, little Johnny, they called me at the time. My middle name's John, Alan John. Grabbed me by the ear, twisted my ear, go up to the person, and I hadn't even done anything. And she was twisting my ear, taking me up to the person saying, say sorry. Now, under those circumstances, the average person's going to say, sorry. Right? With the worry that their ear might be twisted off at some point, right? But are you sorry? Not generally, right? Generally, you're sorry you got in trouble. You're sorry that somebody found out. And you're sorry that they're now twisting your ear. But you're definitely not sorry for what you did. You understand? And this is the problem, is when we're brought up in this manner, by the time we become an adult, we think just saying sorry is enough. I did that, yeah, sorry about that. I said sorry, why haven't you forgiven me? You follow? And so we have this idea with God that God feels the same way as our parents did, and all you have to do is say sorry. And when you think about it, the only reason why our parents might have twisted our ears, say go up and say sorry, is because they were ashamed of our behaviour or something like that, and they just want some instant fix to whatever relationship was damaged or whatever by you saying sorry. But the reality is nothing has changed in the child. And in fact, what the child has learned is that all it has to do is say sorry and all is forgiven. That's not how God works. You can't just say sorry and all is forgiven. You've got to actually be sorry. And that takes a lot more hard work than just saying sorry. Right? And it's a hard work to get to the point of being sorry that the most of us want to avoid. Because it is hard work, and it also, you end up feeling feelings of guilt and shame and other things that you've not felt before, and you don't want to feel those painful feelings. And so most of us want to just stay in our mind and just say, I said sorry, why aren't you forgiving me? And we see this a lot in relationships with partners, where, you know, man cheats on her, he says sorry, he says sorry, he says sorry, he says sorry, he keeps saying sorry, and then 10 years later he's saying, I said sorry, and I've said sorry so many times, why haven't you forgiven me yet? Without him considering that maybe he still doesn't feel sorry, really, you know? And this is often the case. It's just, I'm sorry I got caught, or, you know.
So that's why also it's about feeling, or God made it like it's about feeling, because nobody can help you. You have to do it on your own.
Correct. And it's very
It's
good.
your will.
It's very good, yeah, because you're learning how to use your will, but also you're learning another thing called self-responsibility at an emotional level. I'm responsible for my feelings. I'm responsible for how I feel. And the only way something's going to change in my life is for me to change my feelings about it. That's the only way it's going to change. I'm going to have to change feelings. How do I change feelings? I have to experience them. I have to feel them. I have to acknowledge them. I have to awaken to them to such a point where I want to go through them in order to progress. And that's the key.
And this is the other tricky thing about sin, isn't it? In that process, you have to awaken to the sin and its badness and not judge yourself for it.
Yeah.
As soon as you judge yourself, you're shutting the whole process down.
Yeah, all sorts of complexities arrive when you start judging yourself. So I'm not saying you're going, oh, I'm such a rotten person now, I'm never going to get out of it, I'm a terrible, I should punish myself. And you know, as a child, you were also taught that as a mechanism too. If I punish myself enough, then my mum and dad will get off my back. And you'll find God's laws don't get off your back no matter how long you punish yourself, actually. Because punishing yourself isn't you actually dealing with the problem either. Right?
In fact, it's a good way to get away from the specificity of your sin, if you like. You just go, oh, globally, I'm a bad person.
I'm just bad,
And then you don't actually
give
have
up.
to deal...
I give up.
That's
It's
right,
actually passive aggression, to be frank.
Yeah. You don't have to deal with the exact thing that was wrong, and why you want it, and why you think it's good, and that's where the real work is, if you like. That's where the real sincerity comes from, wanting to see what's really there and why you justify it, and
So this awakening process is very important at this stage, that you understand that it's an emotional process, not an intellectual one. You can use your intellect to help you, but you've got to be very careful about thinking you've done it just because you thought about it enough. Not true.
But I had some fears come up, you know. I mean...
but that's all still very selfish, isn't it? If you think about it.
Why?
Well, what are your fears? Aren't they all selfish? Here's another truth. All your fears are selfish. I should put that on this.
Everyone's or just his?
Everyone's.
Just Alex. There's one law in this. Just Alex.
Every fear you have is selfish, right? It's selfish because it revolves around you. It revolves around what you are afraid of, what you feel, what you are trying to prevent actually as feelings inside of you, in fact. So every fear you construct, if we look at the dynamics of constructing a fear...
Can I just qualify there? That was a joke.
Which was?
The thing about Alex is, because that's the only thing that's on the recording. Somebody asked, is it just his fears that are selfish or all of ours?
Yeah.
And
so for the sake of the recording...
I sarcastically said it's just Alex.
But
hopefully you got that was in jest. Everybody's fears.
Everybody's, yeah. So when we have large amounts of grief, or grief we don't understand, or grief we feel we're not allowed to feel, or grief we feel we're going to be punished for, or grief that we have just because of bad things happening that we didn't really want happening, all sorts of kinds of grief we have accumulated generally as an adult through our childhood life. When we have grief, we build up this the feeling of our grief to such a point that we want to create fear as a way of suppressing our grief. So fear is a method, it's a selfish method to suppress your grief. That's its goal. Its goal is to make you get away from your bad feelings. So you say you're afraid of it, afraid of the feeling. I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. and you start creating fears. Now, fears are actual emotions, but you create these things when you're young. So it's sort of like when Dad, let's say, smacked me, belted me, punished me for speaking up, I now have a feeling in me that if I speak up, I will be punished. If I speak the truth, I will be punished. Because he did punish me. So I have a feeling now he will punish me. That's my grief. And now I tell myself, I'm afraid to speak up.
That's what I have with you.
Yeah, well, you know, this is the relationship with your dad, right? Yeah. So afraid to speak up. Now the fear has been constructed to avoid the grief. So you're basically saying, you're basically telling yourself with your fear saying, you don't have to speak up. God's laws are unfair. You shouldn't have to speak up, is really what the fear is saying. All right? False, of course. God expects you to speak up whether you might get punished or not. God expects you to speak up whether there's violence or not. That's what I do. That's what anybody who's learnt God's truth will do. That's what you will do when you learn God's truth too. But in order to do that, you're going to have to feel the grief associated with speaking up with your dad. And you're going to have to work your way through some of that, right? But you spoke up with your dad, got hammered, got punished, and so now you're telling yourself, I don't have to feel that grief because I'm afraid to speak up. And that's enough justification for me to be untruthful, to be lacking in transparency. It's enough justification. Now, if it's not enough, when somebody says, Alex, you're afraid of speaking up, and you say, yeah, and I should be. It's really what you're saying, right? Yeah, and I should be. So really what that is creating, in fact, is a layer of rage above the fear, isn't it? So whenever somebody says you should speak up, you go, no, I shouldn't. I'm afraid. But really you're saying, pee off, get lost. I should be allowed to get away with not speaking up. Don't you know? In my childhood, my dad belted me for speaking up. And so what? If you had felt the grief, you would see the truth that you should always speak up. It's always better if you speak up than not, right? You'd see that. But the fear is saying, I am justified in not having to deal with this emotion, this grief that I have. I'm convinced that I don't have to do it, right? And then, of course, this constant fear, most men in particular go, and women too, women handle fear very poorly generally, and so most men and women go, how do I, this fear bothers me a lot. How do I keep it under wraps? Keep it under control? Keep it suppressed? Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll create a whole heap of addictions to support me keeping this fear as my justification to keep my fears working, right? And so what do I do? I start creating addictions. I gravitate towards people who don't expect me to tell the truth. I don't expect myself to tell the truth. So these are me feeding my addictions. I might even, sometimes my conscience bothers me about telling the truth. So those nights I take a little bit of alcohol just to numb my conscience out a bit and make me feel relaxed because I feel a bit uptight, or turn to cigarette smoking, calms me down. It's actually a stimulant, but it's calming me down. How does that work? It's got to be calming down my fear something, right? So we turn to physical, emotional, sexual, even spiritual addictions. We've seen a lot here, like, have a philosophy. Reincarnation is true. That's a good philosophy. What does that teach me? It teaches me that I can come back and sort it out later. Do you know what I mean? Just a simple thing like that. Just accept a new philosophy because that's going to support me not dealing with that particular problem, right? Oh, I'm going to have, in the spirit world, I'm going to have some kind of life review. So why bother having one here? if it's all going to happen there, and also it's all going to be forgotten the next time I come, then isn't it better just to deal with what I got now and suppress it all and take what I can to support it? Or what about I'm in fear and I find psychedelic mushrooms calm me down. So in other words, I'm now churning to substances that drug my state in order to avoid it. Or I get so afraid and I feel so angry all the time and I feel I need to suppress my anger so much, I start getting depressed. So what do? I go along to a doctor and say, I'm depressed all the time. And he says, no worries, here's an antidepressant. And now I don't even have to worry about my anger or my fear anymore. I'm totally numb to everything. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And this is how we handle things. But none of it is actually dealing with the problem, right? And this is why we get sicker and sicker and worse, and because the actual problems are not being addressed. So when we want to avoid the grief, we have a layer of fear on top of it all. And when we don't want to acknowledge our fear, there's going to be addictions and rage when the addictions are not met. Yeah. And the way we have to undo it all, well, we can acknowledge our fears, can't we? We can be truthful about our real fears, but that's going to require some sensitivity emotionally. It's going to require me being transparent and open to the people around me, and maybe I don't want to do that. It's going to require acknowledging to myself that I'm not as strong as I think I am, and most of us don't want to admit that. It's going to, we're not strong because we're unable to cope with emotion. That's why we're not strong, really. But most of us think strength is suppression of emotion. So we have to admit a lot of things to us in order to get to the point where the actual awakening process about this fear, which is the sin, is actually there. And most of us don't get that far.
In regards to this sin I have, I feel like a little boy inside.
Well, you are. You're acting as you've been taught by your mother and your father. You've been acting, but you've got to be careful with this, because then you could say, oh, that's all their fault. No, you're an adult male, 51. Didn't you say? 51 years old. How dare you keep blaming other people for 51 years?
It wouldn't help me if I do that,
That's right. It doesn't help you. It doesn't deal with the problem, and also doesn't fix the relationship. Yeah. All it does is assign blame to somebody else who, what, are they alive or dead? Alex, your parents?
They're alive.
They're alive, yeah. So what do you go? Round them up. You did this and you did that to me. And that's going to help that relationship too, isn't it? No. No, it's not going to, is it? You got to learn how to own your own stuff. Everybody does. And if your mum asks, then you might sit down with her and say, but actually running around there and telling her, well, that's a very unloving thing. She's not asking. Right? So, so there's a whole heap of things we do to avoid this stuff. And
the only thing I was suspicious last week was because I didn't feel any grief. And I know if I feel grief, I understand the whole process I just made. And I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what just happened.
Yeah.
I thought I felt something. I had a process, but I didn't.
No, what you felt was the tantrum of facing your fear.
Okay.
And what you did was...
That wasn't... Yeah, okay.
What the action you took was, Olga's away, I got to go where she is.
Okay.
That's the action taken in the avoidance. So...
It takes you back up to that addiction level.
If I was Olga, I would feel impressed by your action. Oppressed by your action.
I always think about it like this, it's almost like your grief is in the center of the circle, and you do have fears that you've taken on and that you believe are real, and then you have addictions you're using to cover that whole inner process.
But it must be said that most of your fears are choices.
Yeah.
And also most of your addictions are choices.
In general, you mean?
Yeah.
And your rage is also a choice.
Yeah. But you can't actually access any grief if you're still actively in addiction. So even if you touch into fear and then you go straight back to addiction, you're back out here. You're not getting closer to that grief, And as Jesus said, a lot of what we call fear is just justification and
rage, really.
rage.
Yeah.
Some of us do have legitimate terror. And
From childhood experience, like let's say your father belted you a lot, then obviously a violent childhood is mean you're going to have some childhood terror, right? Some actual fear.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But if we're always like touching fear or touching rage and going back to addiction, we're never getting close. You can't actually be in an addiction and deal with the grief about that issue. You just can't. It's like a barrier you're placing against the grief is the addiction. So
because remember, addiction is
sin.
Fear is rage is you see the pattern? Grief, is that a sin? No. Interestingly, God gave you tear ducts. Interesting. Not just to keep your eyes watered, but also to allow you to process emotion in a grieving state. But most of us, when we try to deal with emotion, we stay in these states, right? And we call it processing. It's not processing. Rage is not processing. Fear is not processing. You know, or you could call it terror. By the way, is processing, because when you're in a state of terror, you do actually get to the state where you no longer justify fears. But fear is not processing, and addiction. Fear is, I'm saying, I'm afraid, I don't want to go there, I'm afraid, I don't want to go there. You saw an example of it yesterday with Manu when he was here, in a state of fear, couldn't even listen to an answer, wanted to speak all the time. Spirits with him were driving his interaction with me, totally. He has a blockage with his father, he can't listen to a man at all, and I'm sure any of you who have been men in particular trying to relate to him in some way, you'll find there's this time happening. But in the moment, he's also got these spirits going, we are dead scared of this idea that we're not a part of God. Like these spirits are in a panic, and so he goes in a panic, he's in this fear, and what does he do? Doesn't listen, that's a sin. He's asked a question and doesn't give an opportunity to answer. That's also a sin, by the way, to do that. If you ask somebody a question, the right thing to do is listen to their answer. You know, that's a righteous thing to do. It's not righteous to stop them from even being able to answer and just keep going. He also barraged all of you with his problem, with his emotional problem, and that's also a sin. He was unloving there too. But he doesn't realise that, because in the moment the spirits with him are going, I'm in a panic. Fear is saying, stay in the panic, keep going, you know, do what you would normally do. Right? You saw another example of it with the lady that was down the front.
I don't know her name.
We don't know her name, who was asking Mary whether it's all right that she loves me. And I'm going, but never gave us an opportunity to respond, never gave us spirits with her, again, in a panic, causing her to be in a panic. She's in a panic, in her addiction. I've just got to get somebody to tell me I'm okay doing this. We're trying to tell her, no, it's not okay. But the spirits with her don't want to hear that, because the spirits have been invested in that for years, being that way, and so stays in that. Now, one of the things Mary and I would like to, if we get the chance, we'll talk to those spirits involved in those interactions, and potentially we can help alleviate those, help those spirits to get away from the person, so the person feels themselves for a change. But most probably, who knows what will happen there? It will depend on addictions, and there are other feelings as well as to what would happen after that. But in the end, you do so many things, just in little things. When you say little, sins, committing sins all the time, thinking that, I'm justified because my addiction wasn't met. I'm justified because I am afraid. I'm justified now, and so I feel like, I want to get, enraged with the world. And none of it is dealing with a cause of a problem, and also all of it is further sin.
So the best thing would do after your feedback to create the will to be really loving on an emotional level, and check if it's just intellectual or emotional.
You're not going to be able to be loving unless you awaken to sin.
Yeah. So you've got to want, at the moment, there's not a high motivation to feel the sin that's in you. So,
or to feel the addictions or the fears or the rage.
Or that whole process that you're engaging to avoid the sin, there's not a high motivation to find it. So
that's what you need to work on.
That's what you need to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would need to work on getting to the awakening. Getting to the point of awakening. That's
And
what needs to be
you
done.
know, to do that, you're going to have to avoid self-attack and judgment, but also want to see where you're harming others. Also be compassionate with yourself, but not justify what you're doing.
It's
So
pretty tricky. You
it's-
need a lot of integrity to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
integrity.
But it's can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very rewarding to do it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yvette?
When you say that rage is a sin, is it still a sin if you have an interaction with somebody, you're rageful and you go elsewhere, you are on the boxing bag, for example,
Yep.
processing your rage.
Yep.
Well,
now
you might
owning it
not
more.
hit grief, let's say, because you're a bit resistant. Are you still sinning in
Yep.
that place? Thanks.
That's all right. I'm telling you the truth. The reason why, if you look at rage, and let's say I go and punch a bag, but I never get below it, right? Why am I punching the bag? What's my purpose of punching it? So it's like, I got to let out all this bottled up anger. I've got to let out somewhere. Don't want to hit Mary. So go outside, kick the bottom bag, bang the bottom bag, like whatever. So I do that, but I don't get anything below it. What's happened? Why did I do that? What was my purpose?
So I'd get my addiction of my anger onto something else and not feel the fear.
No, what does anger give you? What?
Power.
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 Gives you a
Gives
sense of power.
Okay.
So your aim is to get power over your grief, over your fears. That's the purpose of anger. So I go out, kick the bag, bang, bash the bag. If I don't understand, right, that my goal is to get power over my grief by doing this, then you can see that straight away expressing it is of no benefit to me at all. And in fact, it's supporting my concept that getting power over grief is a good thing. So it's that, even though I might not now be damaging Andy or kids or whatever, I'm still damaging my own self-concept. I'm still sinning against my soul. So it's still a sin because my soul wants to let out the grief, and I'm saying, no, suppress it with power, with rage. You follow?
Yeah.
So I am still sinning because I'm still suppressing it. I'm still trying to control it. I'm still trying to get control of the fear and the grief that's under the fear. I'm still trying to gain some control. In addition, most of the time when we're in a rage, it's because my addiction wasn't met. So basically, when I go out and punch a bag and say, like I'm really just having a tantrum about my addiction not getting met. Now, with a child, bringing up a child, because you brought up 3 now, right? So you know that whenever a child goes into a tantrum, do you get much sense out of them after that? Do they become more loving in their tantrum?
No.
Definitely not, do they?
No.
Like they become far more unloving in their tantrums, don't they? They'll hit you, punch you, they'll kick and scream, and they'll make the whole world know that they are avoiding their grief, right? And so this is the purpose of the rage, is to gain some power over it all.
And
Right.
and may I add, like, say I land in Yvette's life, I'll switch bodies with you, right? Tomorrow, I'd be landing in this, or you are in a situation where you've got a lot of relationships, close relationships. You've got 3 kids and a husband you're living with.
Yep.
Now, where you are in your progression, like everyone in this room, you've got some addictions. You've also got some equality in these relationships. Some of it you've set up, some of it you've accepted. There's ways that you're being harmed, but also ways that you're demanding things of other people. And to sort all that out is going to take sensitivity, isn't it? It's going to take some consideration. You're going to have to feel yourself. You're going to have interactions reflect, have some grief, have some fears maybe.
Mhm.
But if I just, it's all happening and I'm like, ugh, I'm just angry and I just go and punch a bag, what have I avoided? I've avoided all these difficult conversations. I've avoided all this sensitivity to myself and the people around me and what do they really feel and what do I really feel. I know from my own experience, sometimes rage has been a way to almost detune further. It's a response to my overwhelm, if you like. Everything feels complicated. I just don't feel loved. I don't know if that's because my addiction isn't being met or other people are demanding, and the work is figuring all that out and being sensitive to all of that and being compassionate with yourself and everyone around you as you do that, because you're not going to get it tomorrow. But often my rage was a way to just avoid that whole sensitive, sometimes it feels scary and vulnerable and sometimes it feels sad process of sorting out the relationships around you and yourself, primarily yourself, but that will have an effect on the relationships around you.
Yeah. Because sometimes I hit the bag and then I can cry afterwards, but other times I won't be able to. So in that case, is it better to stop it and?
Well, the reason why you first need to hit the bag, in other words, have the tantrum, before you can cry, there's a reason. So there's a justified reason going on. I have justification to be angry about this.
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed. If you don't address that, you'll keep needing to be angry before you get sad. So you could say the anger is like a layer on top of your sadness, preventing a full expression of your sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So you're never going to get to the bottom of your sadness doing this. At the end of the day, it needs to change, and you need to get to the stage where you no longer go into rage and you just straight away go into sadness.
Yeah.
Right?
It can help if you, in that process of hitting the bag, emotionally realize your demand. Because every time you're angry, you have a demand. Whether it's demand not to feel grief, demand someone meet my addiction.
So in other words, Mary's saying, you see your addiction.
Yes.
Yep.
If in that process that connects you to that, that's helpful, isn't
Helpful,
it?
Yeah.
but not the solution.
You still got to do the work on the demand. It's like what Nettie shared last weekend. He had to come to the point where he realised, and I recognise this in my own journey as well, where you realise every time I'm angry, I'm just demanding something from my environment change, rather than feel what I feel.
And rather than me change.
Yeah.
Or
Because
me change something.
I'm trying to force change externally rather than me have to make changes in my own
Frequently
life.
what we want is everyone around us to make changes without us even telling them they need to. Without us even informing them that the reason why we feel they need to. Without us even having confronting discussions about what's going on and why we feel the way we do. We just want everybody magically around us go, oh, Yvette's unhappy. How can we all make her happy? That's what we want. We basically want everybody to know that you're unhappy without you having to say you're unhappy and without you having to express it and without you having to experience it. And you also want them to work out that, you naughty people that you haven't worked out that. And then we go down this track, we're going, oh, if they don't work it out, they don't love me. So now I'm adding to my expectations, actually. Right? And so quite often we go off and have our tantrum because nobody loves me. I've got to deal with all this myself. Feelings, right? And you know what? You're dead right. You're going to have to deal with it all yourself. It's in you. Nobody else can do it for you. And if you expect them to, then basically what you're going to be doing is engaging addiction to overcome a feeling in you that's never going to get overcome by the addiction. And that's the problem, is that this is the potential of what the rage creates. So I've seen people stay in rage for a long time, like hundreds of years, rage. It's in the spirit world, it's very rare for a person to stay in rage less than like 10 years. I remember the channeling last week, Netu, he stayed in rage for 3 months. That's pretty rare. It's very rare to stay in rage just for 3 months. Most people stay in rage a lot longer than that. And on Earth, it's almost half of their life they stay in rage, generally.
Well, if everyone in this room is very honest, they're harbouring anger about something for many years, at least one issue.
Yeah.
And this is the other thing, when you go and punch the bag, sometimes it helps you realise, whoa, I'm really angry about this issue, and I've been denying that for years.
Yeah.
You know, that's also helpful, but again, it's, as Jesus said, not the solution.
Not the solution.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So yes, it's important for us to say rage is a sin, anger is a sin. I'm not saying don't feel it, because obviously you need to know and understand yourself enough to know you are feeling it, but you also need to see, I'm feeling this because I actually don't want to go there. I actually don't want to deal with the real problem, whatever the real problem is. And frequently we do that for lots and lots of different reasons, and each of us have created a whole labyrinth of internal dialogue as to why we shouldn't have to go there for the most part. Yeah.
I had an experience, this is some years ago now, where I'd felt like I'd been doing work on my relationship with my parents in this life. I felt like I'd been dealing with things. I felt like I understood how they'd affect me. I sort of saw the issue, and I hadn't seen my parents for 5 or 6 years maybe. I needed to go and see my mum and collect something. And when I got there, whoa, I got angry. I got so angry. It's the first time in my adult life that I was angry at my mum, but I was really angry with her. And I left there going, I haven't done anything. I'm still demanding that she change rather than grieve, you know. So, yeah.
Easy to stay in those states for long times. Yeah. Now, we also, this is more about this subject. You guys are putting up your hands. Because we also want to get to the other subject of humility, don't we? Because it's tied into this, isn't it? Like, what does it mean to be humble in these situations is an important question that was asked at lunch, and I think it's something we do need to talk about a bit. What does humility feel like? Like, is a good question. Like, because if we can easily list, can't we? Love, truth, humility, faith. And we could talk about these as ideal emotions to seek for. But, you know, what does real love feel like? What does real truth feel like? Truth is not just a thought. There's feelings associated with truth. What does humility feel like? What does faith feel like? Because at some point, you see, we have not been educated in this life probably about any of these emotions in a real sense. And so we don't even half the time know what they feel like. So we talk about them, but don't really grasp the feeling of them, you know. And so, when we talked about awakening, which is obviously something that needs to happen with regard to our sin, I wanted to try and explain to you what it feels like, to awaken, not just how it looks or the process you'll go through, but how it feels inside of you. So with these things, after a while, one of the things that I had to do for myself was I had to start questioning what feelings feel like. So what I did was I found this really interesting site on the internet. I don't recommend following the rest of its suggestions, because it was all about basically detuning from emotions to handle feelings. But I can't remember the name of the site either. I will maybe in the conversation.
The premise was sort of like identify your feeling, and then once you've named it,
it will dissipate.
You detune from
it. Which I don't agree with at all.
Yeah.
But what helped me a lot was that there were these list of feelings, and they listed it in 2 categories. They called one category positive feelings, and then one category negative feelings, And what I really liked about it was that it listed like nuances, of feeling, not just big feelings like rage or anger or fear, but nuances of the feelings like disillusionment, discouragement, indignation. And they used these words. And what I liked about it for myself is I spent a lot of time praying about understanding each feeling, because I wanted to be able to recognize these feelings inside of me. Like I was when I was 33, very detuned from feelings. So I wanted to sort of understand what were the feelings, what were the nuances of the feelings, the intricate, way in which the feeling could be described. I wanted to understand it. So I found this site through some searches. I don't remember how. I can't even remember the site, to be honest. But I think on our website I have put the feelings somewhere on our website. I can't tell you where at the moment, but they're somewhere there under downloads. But it's once I got that page of positive feelings, negative feelings, I spent a lot of time just trying to connect with what the word meant, and also I'd read the dictionary, like what the dictionary meaning of that word was, and then what I tried to do is could I feel that in me, like that feeling, like, so let's look at the word like disillusionment. Interesting word, right? Can I feel disillusionment in me? Like, what does that feel like? What does it feel like when you're disillusioned with things, where you don't really trust anything anymore, where everything you've tried hasn't worked, and you just feel not depressed, but it's not that severe, but it's not also, you don't feel very happy, you don't feel very positive, this disillusioned feeling. What does that feel like? What does doubt feel like? What is, all of these feelings associated with these like bigger emotions like fear and so forth, what do they feel like? And in the process of going through and looking at that, and I spent many, many weeks at it actually, nearly 6 months actually, doing this, just experimenting with what the feelings felt like thing. In that process I learnt a lot about feelings in terms of how they felt inside of me. So instead of them being like an intellectual word, they became a real substance to me, these feelings. And in identifying the feelings, it helped me greatly to see how like some feelings were masking things, like helping me get control of other deeper feelings which were more severe. So like I recognised after a while that a lot of my fear was actually masking my terrors and my grief that I didn't want to feel. And I started understanding how even just the feeling of doubt helped me avoid other deeper emotions. Like it helped me stop taking action and making decisions, right? So what I decided to do was I decided to pray about these feelings and attempt through that process to feel them myself, so that I could understand when I had them. Because before then, if somebody asked me like, how do you feel? I'd go, I don't know. I think I'm happy. Oh yeah, I feel calm enough. By that stage, I've been talking in front of, a lot of my early years up until 33, like I was speaking in front of 10,000 people quite regularly. And quite often I would be absolutely like terrified, speaking in front of that many people. But I would suppress it all and go, oh yeah, that went fine. I think that went fine anyway. That type of thing. I was so totally detuned from every feeling, And so it took me time, and I had to do it myself, because it's no good somebody coming along and saying to me, what you're feeling now is, disillusionment. What you're feeling now is doubt. Because I needed to know what I was feeling. When you're told it from somebody else, just like I've told Alex this thing today, the trouble is, how does that help you? It's sort of like, well, I still can't feel it. So, like, how does that help me? So I had to educate, I took action to educate myself about feelings. Now, of course, after a while I realised this is education that should be happening when we're 6 or 7, like people should be teaching you about feelings and what happens with feelings and how they feel. But of course, I realised that doesn't happen on Earth yet. It'd be nice when there's some school that does it, but there's no one yet that do it that I've ever seen. But I also realised this is where my education was lacking in this life. My education was lacking in the field of understanding emotion. So what I would recommend as a practical thing for all of you to do is to find that list of feelings, wherever that is,
or a list
of feelings. From memory, these lists had positive and negative, and there were about 60 or 70 positive emotions and 60 or 70 negative ones from memory. And allow yourself to ponder and think about and pray about what these feelings feel like, so that you understand your own feelings. Right? So what I learnt in that process is, in opening more and more to my own feelings and working my way through the blockages to my own feelings, I started to be able to feel other people's feelings. So what happened was, when I met Mary, I could feel Mary's feelings before she could feel her feelings. Right? Because I had spent this time recognizing feelings. And then after a while, I was starting to recognize them not only in myself, but also in others. And so I could start describing to people their feelings more and more and more, because I could recognize the feeling coming from them and go, that's disillusionment. Oh, that's doubt. Oh, that's terror. But that one's not terror. That's fear. Or that one's actually you getting a bit, what are the different levels of anger? There's like mild frustration
or
annoyance. What you're feeling is annoyance or mild frustration, or then it generally goes bigger, doesn't it? Mild frustration, really frustration, till you get to sort of boiling over point. Well, that's like rage, So and then there's what, even in the emotional list, they had things like numb, completely numb. You start to realise what's going on. The beauty of doing that is not only do you get to know your own feelings now, but you also become sensitive to others' feelings. And the joy of life is actually interacting with people's feelings.
And
that's the joy of life.
We could say, because really what you're describing is the process of developing humility, aren't you? But when you're in that space of feeling your feelings, and you want your feelings, you can feel other people's feelings, but you have no desire to alter those feelings. You have no pressure on them to alter their feelings. You have no demands on them about
no
their
pressure
feelings.
even to tell them what their feelings are.
Yeah. If you decide to do that, that's a gift, but you don't feel like you're doing it
Well, you only do that when they ask. Yeah.
You're not doing it to get something from them.
Yeah.
You don't need feelings from other people. So the question was about, what does humility feel like? This is a part of it.
This is a part of it.
Yeah.
So a part of humility is understanding emotions, experiencing emotions, you can see the difference between those two things. One is you sort of get it, the other one is you actually have it for yourself. Right? So you want to be able to understand emotions and experience them. You want to do that whether they are positive or negative, what you view as. And we could say positive, you feel them as nice, you feel them as good, or negative is you feel them as pain, you feel them as suffering. You want to do it whether it's that or that, because the secret to humility is being soft to every emotion, not just the ones you're comfortable with, right? Because you want to get comfortable with every emotion. That's the goal. You want to get comfortable with terror. You want to get comfortable with fear. You want to get comfortable with understanding and feeling every emotion. Because like if someone's projecting rage at you and they're yelling and screaming at you, how do you stay calm in that situation if you don't understand rage? If you actually understand it and you've been able to experience your own, you'll be able to sit there and go, there they go. free will being exercised in such a sinful manner, but there they go. Isn't it? You got to admire it. You know, you do. It's sort of like, isn't the human soul amazing? There it goes, experiencing another feeling that's different from the other ones, you know, and you can actually sit there and be with somebody's, even their rage, without feeling that you got to run away
Or if you do have a feeling, you just feel that.
Well, eventually you'll get to the stage though where you won't have one. You know?
But when we're learning humility.
So when you're learning, of course, yeah, of course. So it also is understanding plus experiencing as an emotion your relative position.
What does that mean?
I haven't finished the sentence yet.
Sorry.
Your relative position with God.
And would you say with others as well, babe?
Well, once you experience it with God, you automatically have a tendency to start experiencing it with others, don't you? It's like, but yes, you would also be with others. So what do I mean by your relative position? Well, I'm saying God knows everything. You know next to nothing. Get used to it. You know, God knows every emotion. You may at the beginning might know none of them. Get used to it. You can get educated that way. The more you understand your relative position with God, the more humble you are in your interactions with God. So you can go, I'm just a little guy, a creation of God. That's all I am. I'm just this guy, oftentimes clueless, oftentimes doesn't know what he's doing, needs education. And this allows me to go, okay, I'm open to education. I'm open to discovering. I'm open to educating myself, but I'm also open to other people educating me. I'm open to these things because I understand my relative position with God. God knows I need more education. If I want to approach God and approach God in terms of understanding God more, I need more of God's education, right? So that my relative position with God is very important for me to understand. Now, of course, when I do that, I will also see that my relative position with all of you is that we're equals. I'm not better than you, but I'm also not worse than you. We're equals from God's perspective. So whenever I put myself down in front of you, I'm not treating myself as your equal. Whenever I accept your, emotionally accept, of course, I don't have to say anything to you, but if I emotionally accept your condescension, then I'm putting myself as lower than you. That means I don't believe we're equal. I don't feel we're equal, right? If I'm humble, I will start to feel we're equal. I will feel that, you know, the condescension. A lot of you have been dishing it out to me at different times these last 2 weeks, right? And particularly at the beginning when we start conversations, that's generally the case. Or particularly when I just write a list of beliefs up that are confronting yours. It's like condescension.
What's
Central.
condescension?
Condescension. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Why would he know anything about that? You know, all that kind of stuff. All the thing. He's a bit of an idiot thinking that kind of thing. Right? So I can feel all of that, but I don't have to let it in me. Right? I don't have to feel that it's real, that it means anything, that it means I'm worthless. I don't have to do that. When I first started teaching, I used to do that. I used to go away, cry for a couple of days from every group, pretty much, because I was upset about how they treated me all the time. So, you know, we go around doing this for free, and sometimes, you know, for the first 5 years, not a single person gave me a single donation for doing it. Right? How do you think I felt every time? It's like, go away going, well, obviously nobody valued it enough to even know I'm doing it for free, but obviously I've got costs, I've got to drive there, I've got to get there, but nobody wanted to help me out with any of it. It's sort of like, then I had to realise, people don't even know the value of this, of what we're sharing with them. You know, I had to come to that understanding go through the emotion of it. But me staying humble helped me do that. It helped me go, it's okay. You want to treat me badly, well, that's okay. I'm not going to take it on, though. I'm not going to believe what you're saying to me is true. Right? The only time I accept something as a truth is when somebody I know who's more loving than me tells me a truth. That's when I accept the truth. I'd suggest you do the same, but it's up to you, of course. So these things are a part of developing humility. Humility is a state of being that allows you to absorb more information without resistance.
It's not without discernment.
No.
There's a high level of
or
discernment.
assessment or any of that.
Yeah. So does
you-
everyone understand the distinction there? So Jesus is saying you accept education without resistance, but you're quite discerning because you can feel everybody. You're quite discerning about who you want to receive the education from. It's not just anyone comes along and gives you an idea and you're like, yep, okay, great. You know, because you're feeling, you can feel, this person has a loving intention.
For me.
For me. Or for everyone.
Or for everyone.
Really, it needs to be. I think I want to then listen. I want to absorb what they have to say.
But it's more than that too, isn't it? Because as a child, if you think about a child comes up and says, Dad, how does the sun work? Let's say. You know, they see it every day. Of course, they're going to ask sooner or later how it works. What do? And the child is so interested in knowing the truth that he first thinks, well, I've seen the sun for how many, by this stage it might be 5 or 6, right? I've seen the sun for 4 or 5 years. I want to know how it works. So he's naturally going to go to someone who's older than him, say, how does it work? And then, you know what he finds out most times? That you haven't found out either. you know, because you at some point in your past probably asked the same question, and then somebody told you, shut up, I don't know. You know, work it out yourself or whatever they told you. Instead of educating you and showing you how it works, if they have the knowledge, or if they don't, referring you to somebody who did. For the most part, a lot of parents just shut down the child, and so you end up being 40, having a child going, and him asking, how does the sun work? And you're going, it's not something that I have worked out myself. I'd have to go and research that. Now, a humble person asks questions, constant questions, don't they? But with the point of view of having them answered, not from the point of view of argumentation. So the child's not going, how does the sun work? Saying to himself, I already know how the sun works. Let's work out whether this fella knows. Does he? He's asking sincerely. He's asking from a state of sincerity. I want to know how it works. Tell me. Right? And often it'll be dad or mum. Please tell me how it works. He's coming from a place of sincerity. He wants to know. He's not testing his father or mother. He's not trying to make you feel bad. He's not trying to feel like he knows better than you.
He's not trying to get one up.
He's not trying to get one up on you. He's not trying to show you that you didn't ask a question that he thought he was clever enough to ask, or any of those other things. He's doing it because he sincerely wishes to know. Right? And that's the only thing driving his inquisitive nature. Now, if we're humble, we'll be exactly the same as that. We'll be inquisitive. We'll want to know. We won't want to prove that we already know. We won't want to ask the question when really it's a statement. Like, you don't know, do you? It's really that statement instead of like just asking a sincere question. Frequently in our presentations we get all sorts of motivations for asking these questions, and oftentimes half of the reasons are all flawed. They're all to prove something, or to prove that a person knows something, or to make a statement, or to tell us how useless we are because we don't understand what the person understands at some point, or whatever. And oftentimes it's motivated by spirits with the same motivation as well. But a sincere child doesn't do that. A sincere child just asks a question because they want to know the answer. Right? Now you'll notice in our groups a lot of times that as the first day you get a lot of insincerity, and then by the second or the third day people are starting to get used to it. I want to know, this is very interesting, I didn't think about that, and they start wanting to know in a sincere manner, right? And that is very good that change occurs. But what I'm suggesting is, if you're humble, you will be like that all the time with everybody. You go, I noticed, Mary, you were doing that thing. Why did you do that? Not because you want to make Mary feel bad about doing it, not because you want to ridicule her, not because you want to put her down, but because you sincerely want to know what happened there. That's it. Right? And you'll do that with your partners, and you'll do that with your friends, and you'll do that at business. You know, you won't presume that everyone's got bad motives. You won't presume through your injury that everybody has an underlying desire to hurt you. You won't presume that they're going to use the information against you. That you won't presume that they're going to respond in a condescending manner to your question, because a child doesn't presume those things. The child just goes, asks the question, wants the answer. Right? So what I would suggest to you is, if you can develop these qualities of humility, you are going to find not only your life much easier, because you won't have as many conflicts, but also you're going to find that you'll be more open and responsive to any direction God may wish to give you. Because you're like a child when you're approaching God as well. You're like a child asking, what's going on here? I want to know. What's happening there? I want to know. You know, not for the point of view of scoring points or feeling better than somebody else, but just because you want to know the truth, knowing that it's the truth that sets you free. Because it's only truth that helps you have more freedom. And you know that, so you know, a child knows. If it knows more, understands more about the world it's living in, it's going to be able to interface better with the world. It's going to interface better with nature. It's going to interface better with people if it understands what's happening. Right? We need to have the same approach. That's what humility is. And that's why I said in the first century, unless you become like little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of God. That's what I meant. Unless you become that humble, like an inquisitive little child asking for things, you're going to find that you will not be able to receive God's love, you'll not be able to receive God's truth, and you will not be able to enter the eighth sphere of the spirit world, which is the first sphere of the kingdom of God. All right? Okay. Just a small question?
Is there a definition for you when you say emotions and feelings?
It's 20 past 3.
I was going to finish. I was going to have a break at 3, weren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think so.
I'm already 20.
No, at 2 you mean?
Oh, 2 is it? What is
No,
the
it's
time?
20 past 2. No,
Oh,
you're
okay.
right. though.
Yeah. We'll have a break at 30 past.
Yeah.
Okay, good question. What's the difference between feelings and emotions?
Is this also your question, Liliana? Oh, good.
Okay. Well, a lot of times I use the terms in you know, interchangeably, but if we want to get pedantic, let's look at how the soul experiences life. Firstly, you've got your senses. Right? So you could say feeling, touch, is one of those senses, isn't it? And so that is a sense. You could say, if we want to define the senses, the average person believes there's 5. You know, what do we call them? Touch, taste, smell, hearing, and seeing. That's our sort of main senses that we recognise. A person who goes one step further might recognise the intellect as a sense in itself, so they might talk about intelligence or as a sense. But most of the time we refer to those 5. Of course, it's not very accurate, because actually taste is all about smell. So, and in fact, in your spirit body, the way you taste things is by smelling them. So, you know, some of the senses are sort of what they call senses are mixed up a bit. But senses are one way in which you experience life. So if we talk here, we're talking about how you gather experience in your environment. So let's call that experience, which is what God wanted you to gather by being here. Experiences. So one way is through your sensory apparatus. Now, your physical body has a subset of sensory apparatus that are not the same as your spirit body. So if you look at your bodies, not everybody, but every body of which there are two, each body has, so we've got our spirit body and our physical body, which genetically look very similar to each other but are in different dimensional spaces. Each body has a group of senses. Now, the physical body has a subset of senses that the spirit body has more of. And also the spirit body's senses are wider in scope of their operation, right? But they're still senses. They still come in. There's physiological and nervous system responses to the process of these senses, and they get all processed in the spirit body's brain and generally sent on to the soul. So when you have a physical body sense, somebody touched you, there's actually a lot going on. Somebody touches you, it registers in your brain as a touch, right? That brain feeling gets, along with the emotion, actually, gets sent to the spirit body, and the spirit body in its mind assesses it, and then also automatically, without assessment, passes it on to the soul as a soul experience. So the soul remembers it happened, right? And these things are all happening instantly. So part of your experience is your senses. And you could say the sense of touch, or you could say feeling things with your skin and your organs and your muscles are all a part, and also what's going on inside of you with your nervous system and all the other systems, your cardiovascular system and so on, they all combine to form feelings that are sent on to the apparatus of the soul to assess. Yep. So they are your senses. These senses help you experience life. Yep. Then there's, separate to your senses, responses to your senses, and also things that can cause your senses to respond. And these things I would classify as emotions. So in other words, you have a feeling, and sometimes then it motivates your body to act, and then the body, as a result of that feeling, has a sense that it's active. So an example of that is, I want to go for a bushwalk. That's an emotion. Because I feel that if I go for a bushwalk, I'll get connected to nature and it feels good. So it motivates me to go to the place where I'm going to have a bushwalk, and in the process of the bushwalk, my senses are all happening. And those senses are now interfacing with my emotions, and now I'm having an experience that is not just my senses, but it's the senses connected with my emotion. I get to assess everything, right? Then, of course, there's my intellect occurring at the same time. In other words, my intellect is assessing. Now, there's two parts of my intellect. There's a part of my intellect that handles my senses, which is automatic. And then there's a part of my intellect that handles my emotions, which are less automatic and more, they're experiential. They happen as time goes by. So these things are all occurring. So when we talk about my emotions, I'm talking specifically about the feelings associated with my emotions. But when I talk about senses, I'm talking about the feelings associated with the senses that exist in my bodies. But they all create an experience which can be loving or unloving. And an example of my senses sensing an unloving experience is someone comes along and punches me in the nose. I get two forms of experience there. I get an emotion from them of rage and anger, right, violence, and I also get the sense of them wanting to do damage to my physical body to the point where I'm in pain. I get both at the same time, right? So that's a part of the experience. You follow? And so our emotional experiences are often a combination of the interaction between our senses, what's going on in our mind, and primarily our emotions. Does that make sense to you? Yeah? So when we speak of going through emotions, they are stored experiences that you haven't felt fully. They are stored experiences. So your soul stores, your half of the soul, stores experiences through this experience that happened as a combination of sensory as well as emotions added to your assessment of what was going on. You could say added to your beliefs. And all of those things are stored in your soul. If they are out of harmony with love, they damage your soul. If they are in harmony with love, they bring joy and happiness to your soul. Make sense?
And can we add that the quality of humility enables you to move, if you like, the unloving experiences that have been stored in your soul, to release them so that they're no longer within you.
But also the quality of humility allows you to feel the loving experiences as they meant to be felt. So we see a lot of people not being humble to love, for example. They don't even know when they're being loved. You know, a lot of people don't even know when they're receiving a sexual projection from somebody. They don't even know.
Which is not love, the sexual projection.
Which is not love. So well, it depends where it comes from, doesn't it? If it's a soulmate, it depends whether you want it or not, whether it was love. But you can see that the subtotal of the experience can either be stored in the soul, and that's usually what happens when the experience is unloving, in other words, painful. We have a tendency to suppress it and keep it in the soul. And that's what damages our soul. With the loving experiences, we do have more of a tendency just to have them and go, wow, that was a lovely experience. You know, it's a bit like, I suppose if you like a bath or you like a shower, when you have a shower, you go, oh, that's nice, eh? But do you store that experience? The only thing you really store is that you can have a shower again. Because it's nice. Why would you not want to have it again?
So we tend to store the hurting
emotions. Yeah, hold a bit closer so you hear better.
So we tend to more store the unpleasant emotions.
We do, yeah, because we don't experience them fully in the moment.
If we experience them fully,
You
they
won't
wouldn't
store them,
Yeah.
But unfortunately for most of us, we don't experience them fully, so we store them. So they remain there, they damage the operation of the soul, therefore damage our bodies.
But also as a child, you have no chance to feel it fully.
Correct, because you're often not given the chance, are you? Yep. So if a child's given the chance to experience an emotion fully, he won't have to experience it later, which is a wonderful thing to know when you're bringing up a child. If you can help a child experience its grief fully, then he won't have to do it again, right? But if you shut it down, the child's going to have to do it again because he's stored it now. He didn't feel it fully. He didn't experience it fully. So the key with all experiences is to have them fully at the time they happen.
So they become what we call trauma
Or-
only because we store them.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Now, really what we want to be ending up with is just a memory of them. Because if we can just have a memory of them, then we know, oh, shower, nice. Have another one of those. Have a swim, nice. Have another one of those. Oh, get punched in the nose, not very nice. Try to avoid that where possible. Do you know what I mean? You don't have a worry about it happening because the trauma's not stored. But you know in the future you don't want to do that again.
It's kind of funny the way you say it, like, oh, get punched in the nose, not nice, and try to avoid it. But some of us live in relationships which is like getting punched in the nose
every
continually,
day.
And we think it's, we've got to have more of that because we haven't felt the trauma and so we get confused about what love is, or how I should treat myself.
Isn't it that when we grow up, we actually kind of invent these experiences so we can deal with the trauma? Is it?
Well, sometimes, but that is quite rare, to be honest. Most people invent experience to avoid the actual trauma and create a different trauma so they don't have to handle the actual one.
Yeah, but also I think you mean attract the trauma. We attract
we do attract
we
trauma.
Do attract relationships.
The soul attracts what it needs to expose its trauma. God designed the universe called the law of attraction, and the law of cause and effect were created so the soul would attract an experience that triggers the trauma. And that's a purposeful creation of God's to help you release your trauma.
But it only works if you're humble. If you're not humble, you just stay there.
You just store another thing.
You just store more and more stuff.
Yeah.
You have to feel it as it's happening.
Yeah. So the key with humility, you can also see, is to feel things as they happen. That's another aspect of humility. Feeling things as they occur. Don't put it off. Don't go, oh, I'm at work, I need to cry, so I'll put it off to tonight. Because you'll find by the time you got to tonight, you can hardly even remember what you wanted to cry about.
Or you're going to take effort and to get back there, and
Yeah. Now, of course, it's very hard in today's society to do things like that, isn't it? Because you're at work and they expect you to not cry. They expect you to be productive and so forth. And so a truly loving environment would say, if you need to cry, go and cry. So when we are working with people, anytime they need to cry, they can go off crying. Even when they want to be angry, which is not really
humble yet,
they're allowed to do that too. Right?
A lot of people say they love coming to do things in God's way, which is our non-profit, because they, just for that one thing, they're usually working somewhere else to get money, and when they come and do jobs, they can just have their feelings as they're happening.
Yeah. So one of the secrets of humility is have the feeling as you have it. Have it in full. Let it happen to the end. Joy as well as sadness.
Which leads me to my next question about grief. I don't think in my life before, grief is very associated with death. I don't think I ever was so open to go through and experience this emotion till I had
someone die.
Tragic,
Yeah, and that's true for most people, actually. What happens in the soul, all these built-up experiences of the past sort of add a lot of grief to the soul. So there's all sorts of childhood experiences and everything that are just adding up. But because we have the belief that we're not allowed to feel anything unless it's major. It has to be major, and then you're allowed. And even then, you're not allowed for too long. Somebody dies, 3 months, and that's about all most people will give you, to feel some grief. And then after that, they're saying, aren't you getting over it yet? So but if it's the death of a child, then you're allowed to be grieving for the next 20 years, right? That society has definitions on how much grief you're allowed to experience and when you're allowed to have it. Yeah. Now, the trouble is you've got built-up grief over time. When you do have a major thing happen and you're telling yourself now you're allowed to feel it, it's not only that you're going to be feeling it. There's going to be a whole slew of other things from all sorts of places that you start feeling. That's all the stored stuff as well. And this is why when people have a major thing like a death, they then feel enabled to feel their grief. And so they go through all sorts of grief, not just about the person dying, but all sorts of stuff from their childhood, and all sorts of things happen. Yeah. There are other types of grief that generally are considered to be okay to feel, such as if you've been sexually abused. The average person in society generally feels that if you've been sexually abused and you're a woman, you're allowed to feel it. If you're a man, not so much. You should be getting over it. But if you're a woman, you're allowed to feel it. So when there's something sexual in nature that occurs abusive to a woman, oftentimes that's when she's allowed to feel a whole series of things, which might not be just about the abuse. It might be all sorts of stuff that she had stored before as well. that all start getting felt under those circumstances. Another time when generally we're allowed to feel some grief is when we have a traumatic experience, like a car accident or or husband or wife leave you. Those kind of experiences. Then we're allowed to feel some grief generally, right? But society has some very strict rules about how much grief you're allowed to have, when you're allowed to have it, how you should have it, and also whether the justification for having is great enough to be logical to the other people in society.
But grief is something very intimate.
Exactly. So in accepting all of these societal definitions, we're actually closing ourselves down to what is inside ourselves. Yep. God wants you to have a personal experience of everything, which includes letting go of all of the things that are personally inside of you. And so you've got to create a space inside of your life where you're allowed to do that.
Where society doesn't get a say.
No. Yeah. So for me, I had to create 5 years life alone, and I lived on a house that I built on the beach, and I spent almost 5 years of that time that I was there. I did go to work occasionally, but I spent all the rest of the time just dealing with grief. Yep. And I created that space on purpose because I knew I had a lot to do with, so I needed to deal with it. You guys don't have that much to do with in comparison. You don't have to do so extreme a thing. But I had to. I was pretty shut down and I needed to feel something. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. And can we go behind? Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So like if I'm in a situation, let's say at work, and I have some grief or sadness in me,
Yep.
and there's no like room to feel it there,
Yep.
how do I come back to it later?
Well, it's a tricky situation, isn't it? Firstly, every time you come back to it later, it's not going to be anywhere near as fulfilling as if you deal with it right there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, the world probably is not going to let you do that, right? So what I do under those circumstances is I get out my notepad and use my feeling list that I've learnt over time, and I write down all the feelings so that at least I'll have some connection to them when I go away from that space.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes
It's not
sense.
ideal.
Yeah.
It'd be better if you had a job that just allowed you to have a good cry right there and then.
Mm.
But if you don't, then you're better off like taking some notes down and
Describing
as
to
to yourself.
you can to yourself, because
Your
your
feelings.
description is going to be the most powerful for you.
Mm.
Yeah.
But also, you have the opportunity to go to the toilet and lock yourself in a stall.
Yeah.
And have a cry.
I did that one time actually. I
Yeah.
used that opportunity that I could do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah.
So another thing I used to do is just know where my private spaces were around me.
Mm.
So like I used to work as a computer consultant for companies, and whenever I felt like I needed to feel some grief, I would always make sure that I had a place where I could take my car.
I was going to say cars are very
Cars are
good.
very good because
Soundproof.
you can they're fairly soundproof. You can close the doors, park under a tree somewhere in privacy, and just have a good cry, and nobody would know, right? So yeah, there's ways to construct a life where whenever you feel something, you can feel it there and then. But it is difficult. Society will make all sorts of restrictions on you if you allow it to. But there are ways around it too, you know.
Mm.
I actually, in one house I had, it was right near a lot of other houses, so I created a soundproof booth in the middle of my house, which was sound absorbent, so no sound would come out of it, and that's where I went when I had a cry.
Built-in cupboards are really
Built-in
good.
cupboards are another one.
Yeah, back of wardrobe.
Yeah, back of wardrobes.
I've done
Yeah,
processing in
yeah,
cupboards
under the bed.
when we're away. Yeah.
There's all sorts of ways around. If you really want to feel, there's lots of
I
ways.
think your first answer was what I needed, because like I feel like most of the time it's just like I'll forget what I should come back to.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to just like note as much as possible to like be able to connect with it later.
So you can reconnect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
less effective than actually doing it in the moment, but it's better than not noting anything down and then forgetting altogether.
It's like threads sometimes, isn't it? And even sometimes when I'm crying about something, or I've cried about something, but I know there's more to go, I will write down exactly what I was connecting to, because it helps me, like then when I have more reflective time, or I want to come back, I know I need to come back here. Those sentence or two sometimes is just enough for me to reconnect with, oh yeah, there's more for me there.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Good. Now, straight in front of you, there was a question, and then here.
Oh, I was just very curious, since what I'm getting from my humble understanding from everything you've shared is that God's children, including myself, can be a little bit unruly.
Yeah.
So and you guys are trying to, lay down some parenting advice here.
Yes.
So
it's exactly what we're trying to do, actually. Yeah.
But we haven't spoken about the laws.
Yeah.
And my father's a cop.
Yep.
And laws,
Laws, yeah.
I like rules. I like laws.
Father's a cop.
Do you like
Do you
laws?
like them or not like them?
I think you've been pretty much rebelling against
I
laws.
think
haven't you?
yeah.
Well, anyway, I didn't grow up with him, but anyway, I just always liked laws and order, and
Well,
I just like the idea of, like you said, there's sexual laws, there's emotional laws. You
Yeah.
talked about
Yeah.
emotional laws,
Spiritual
laws,
Yeah.
and I would love if Jesus would get into that, a little bit, because it
Yeah.
seems like if I know about the laws, I can get almost like a map of understanding of myself.
That's true. Of course, the discussion of law can become very complicated very quickly, and if you stay in your head about it, you can get very complicated about trying to obey these laws with your mind rather than actually being a feeling that you want to obey them. So you've got to be very careful of that, because obviously the law measures the feelings, not your mind. Right? So perhaps what we need to do, we'll have a break now maybe, and what we need to do after the break is talk about some basic principles surrounding law rather than the laws themselves. Because there are some fundamental principles surrounding law that it's worth understanding, and also it demystifies many of the laws if you understand the fundamental principles guiding those laws. Does that make sense? Because God has literally made, there's billions of laws. So no discussion about law will ever be complete when we have a finite amount of time. So what we need to do is reduce those laws somehow into principles that would make more logical sense, so that we can say, right, this principle is there, so there must be laws about it. This principle is here, so there must be laws about it. And this will help you greatly in terms of doing some things in your life where you start to recognize and respect not only the law itself, but actually God's authority to be able to make them. Because remember, he created us, so he made the laws. And a lot of times we don't respect his authority to do so. We sort of think, well, we should get away with not obeying the law, is what we think. So it's very important to understand some of the principles about law. So what we do is we have a break now, because both Mira and I need to go to the toilet, even if you don't. And then we'll come back and just have a short discussion about the principles, and also how to find out more about those principles. Okay?
Thank you.